The envelope in my mailbox had that familiar HOA letterhead that always made my stomach drop. But nothing could have prepared me for what was inside. I pulled out the letter while standing in my driveway in Boulder, Colorado, watching fresh snow fall on what was already 6 inches of white powder covering everything in sight. The letter demanded that I, Ethan Patterson, clear the snow from the community parking lot by 8 a.m. the following morning or face a $500 fine. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. The community parking lot. Not my driveway, not my assigned parking space, but the entire 40-car parking lot that served the entire Meadowbrook Heights development. I'd lived here for 2 years, and never once had anyone mentioned snow removal being my responsibility. Hell, I'd seen the HOA's contracted snow removal service out there dozens of times during winter storms. My phone was already in my hand before I finished reading the letter. I called the HOA management office and got their voicemail. Of course. It was 5 p.m. on a Friday, and apparently leaving threatening letters in mailboxes before disappearing for the weekend was standard operating procedure for these people. I went inside my townhouse and dug through my filing cabinet until I found my HOA contract and bylaws. I'd bought this place 2 years ago, and like an idiot, I'd only skimmed the documents at closing. Now I read every single word. Nowhere in the contract did it mention anything about individual homeowners being responsible for common area snow removal. In fact, Section 12 explicitly stated that the HOA would maintain all common areas including parking lots, sidewalks, and landscaping through contracted services, paid for by monthly HOA fees. The letter was signed by Patricia Dalton, the HOA president. I'd met Patricia exactly once, at a mandatory homeowners meeting 6 months ago, where she'd spent 45 minutes lecturing everyone about proper garbage can placement. She was the kind of woman who wore pearls to a casual neighborhood gathering, and had that specific haircut that seemed to be issued along with HOA board positions. She'd reminded me of every middle school vice principal I'd ever encountered, the type who enjoyed wielding petty authority more than anything else in life. I took photos of every page of my contract with my phone, then composed what I thought was a very professional email explaining that my contract contained no such requirement and that I would not be clearing the parking lot. I sent it to the general HOA email address and to Patricia's personal email that was listed on the letterhead. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright. I woke up to my doorbell ringing at 7:45 a.m. I stumbled to the door in my pajamas and coffee deprivation to find Patricia standing on my porch with 2 other women I vaguely recognized from the neighborhood. "Mr. Patterson, the parking lot hasn't been cleared," Patricia said without any greeting. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat and holding a tablet like it was a weapon. "Good morning to you too," I said. "Did you get my email?" "I got it. Your interpretation of the contract is incorrect." Section 18, subsection D clearly states that homeowners are responsible for snow removal. I'd read Section 18 so many times last night I could practically recite it. Section 18 is about individual driveways and walkways leading to individual units. It says nothing about common areas. The parking lot is a shared space, which makes it a shared responsibility, one of the other women chimed in. She had the same haircut as Patricia, which I was starting to think was contagious. No, that's not how contracts work. Section 12 explicitly states that the HOA maintains common areas. The parking lot is a common area. I was trying to keep my voice level, but it was hard when 3 women were glaring at me from my porch at not even 8 in the morning on a Saturday, Patricia tapped something on her tablet. The fine has been issued. You have until noon to clear the parking lot or an additional $500 fine will be applied. You can't just make up rules, I said. I'm not paying any fines and I'm not clearing that parking lot. Then we'll see you at the compliance hearing, Patricia said with a tight smile. She turned and walked away, her two companions following like ducklings. I closed the door and immediately called my real estate agent, Marcus, who'd sold me the townhouse. He didn't answer. I left a message explaining the situation and asking if he knew a good real estate attorney. By noon, another letter appeared in my mailbox. Another $500 fine. By 6 p.m., a third letter arrived, bringing my total alleged fines to $1,500 for a single day of not clearing snow from a parking lot I had no contractual obligation to clear. Marcus called me back Sunday morning. "That's insane," he said after I explained everything. "I've sold 6 properties in Meadowbrook Heights, and I've never heard of individual owners being responsible for the parking lot. The HOA has a contract with Alpine Snow Services. I know because the HOA president at the time specifically mentioned it as a selling point. Can you testify to that?" I asked. "Sure, but you're going to need a lawyer. HOAs can get really nasty when they think they're right, even when they're completely wrong. Let me give you a number." He gave me the contact information for Jennifer Walsh, a real estate attorney who apparently specialized in HOA disputes. I called her Monday morning and got an appointment for that afternoon. Jennifer's office was in a strip mall between a pet grooming place and a tax preparation service. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with red hair pulled back in a ponytail, and an expression that suggested she'd seen every flavor of HOA nonsense imaginable. $1,500 in fines over one weekend, she said, shaking her head as she reviewed my documents. "That's aggressive even by HOA standards, and you're absolutely right, there's nothing in here about you clearing the parking lot. So what do I do?" "Well, first, you're going to get a letter from me stating that you're disputing all fines and requesting an immediate compliance hearing with the full board present. Second, we're going to request copies of all meeting minutes, budget documents, and contracts the HOA has with service providers. If they have a contract with a snow removal service, which I'm betting they do, and they're trying to force you to do it instead, that's a breach of their fiduciary duty to the homeowners." "Why would they even do this?" Jennifer leaned back in her chair. "Could be a dozen reasons. Budget shortfalls, personal grudge, power trip, corruption. I had a case last year where an HOA president was making homeowners do work that contracted services were supposed to do, then pocketing the money meant for those services. Got her arrested for embezzlement. You think Patricia's stealing? I think something's fishy. Nobody fights this hard about snow removal unless there's a reason. Let me dig into it." The compliance hearing was scheduled for the following Friday evening in the community clubhouse. I showed up with Jennifer and a folder full of documents. Patricia was there with her board, which consisted of her 2 porch companions from Saturday morning and a tired-looking man in his 60s who kept checking his watch. The tired man, who introduced himself as Gary Norton, the board treasurer, called the meeting to order. Patricia immediately launched into a presentation about my repeated violations and refusal to comply with community standards. "He's letting the neighborhood down," Patricia said, clicking through photos on her laptop projected onto a screen. They were pictures of the parking lot with snow in it. Not deep snow, maybe 3 inches because it had snowed again on Tuesday. "This is unacceptable. We all have responsibilities as homeowners." "Miss Dalton," Jennifer interrupted. Can you please point me to the specific section in Mr. Patterson's contract that requires him to clear the community parking lot? Section 18, subsection D, Patricia said immediately. That section refers to individual driveways and walkways, Jennifer said, not common areas. The parking lot is used by all residents, therefore it's a shared responsibility. That's not what the contract says. In fact, Section 12 explicitly states that the HOA will maintain all common areas. The parking lot is defined as a common area in Section 3, Paragraph 2. I have the relevant sections highlighted here. Jennifer slid copies across the table to each board member. One of the other women, whose nameplate read Barbara Mills, frowned as she read. But we've always expected residents to help with snow removal. Expected and contractually required are two different things, Jennifer said. What service does the HOA currently contract for snow removal? Silence fell over the room. Gary looked at Patricia. Patricia's face had gone red. We terminated that contract, Patricia finally said. When? Jennifer asked. That's not relevant to this hearing. It's absolutely relevant. Mr. Patterson pays monthly HOA fees. Part of those fees are allocated for common area maintenance, which includes snow removal. If you've terminated the snow removal contract but haven't reduced fees accordingly, where is that money going? Our budget allocation is none of his concern, Patricia snapped. Gary cleared his throat. Actually, Patricia, homeowners have a right to review the budget. It's in the bylaws. Patricia shot him a look that could have melted the snow outside. We'll discuss this in closed session. There's nothing to discuss, Jennifer said. Either my client has a contractual obligation to clear the parking lot, or he doesn't. The contract is very clear that he doesn't. All fines issued are therefore invalid and must be rescinded immediately. The fines stand, Patricia said. This hearing is concluded. Then we'll see you in court, Jennifer said pleasantly. And while we're there, we'll be requesting a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. I saw Gary's eyes widen. Barbara and the other board member, whose name I'd already forgotten, exchanged glances. Patricia's jaw was clenched so tight, I worried her teeth might crack. We left the hearing and Jennifer walked me to my car. That went about how I expected, she said. Give it a week. Either they'll back down or we'll file suit. But that treasurer looked very interested in the word audit. My guess is he's been kept in the dark about something. She was right. 3 days later, Gary Norton showed up at my door carrying a cardboard box. He looked like he hadn't slept in those 3 days. Can I come in? He asked. I need to show you something. I let him in and cleared space on my coffee table for the box. Gary pulled out a stack of financial documents. I've been treasurer for 6 months, he said. Patricia wanted me on the board because I'm a retired accountant. Said the previous treasurer had let things get disorganized and she needed someone detail-oriented. I trusted her. I shouldn't have. He spread out bank statements and receipts across my table. The HOA was paying Alpine Snow Services $3,000 per season for full snow removal. Last October, Patricia terminated the contract. She told me it was too expensive and that we'd find a cheaper alternative. She submitted invoices for a new company, Dalton Property Services, for $1,200 per season. I approved the payments because it was a significant savings. Let me guess, I said. Dalton Property Services doesn't exist. Oh, it exists. It's registered to Patricia's husband. And they've done exactly 0 snow removal this entire winter. She's been trying to force different homeowners to do it for free while pocketing the $1,200. I went back through the records. She's done similar things with landscaping and pool maintenance. Over the past year, she's funneled nearly $15,000 to fake contracts with her husband's company. That's embezzlement, I said. That's exactly what it is. Gary looked miserable. I contacted the other legitimate board members. None of us knew. Patricia handles all the vendor communications. She showed us altered contracts and fake invoices. When your attorney mentioned an audit, I started actually looking at the source documents instead of just the summaries Patricia gave me. It's all a scam. What are you going to do? I've already done it. I contacted the police this morning. There's a detective coming to my house tomorrow to review everything. I wanted to tell you first because you're the one she was trying to screw over the worst. If you hadn't fought back, we never would have caught this. The next few weeks were chaos. Detective Sarah Mendoza took over the investigation, and it turned out Patricia's scheme went even deeper than Gary had discovered. She'd been embezzling from the HOA for nearly 3 years, ever since she'd become president. The fake company had received over $50,000 in total. Patricia's husband claimed he didn't know the company wasn't actually providing services, that Patricia handled all of that. Whether that was true or not wasn't my problem. Patricia was arrested at a board meeting. I wasn't there, but Gary called me immediately after. Apparently she tried to run when the police showed up, which was just about the most Patricia thing I could imagine. She was charged with embezzlement, fraud, and a few other financial crimes I didn't fully understand. The HOA hired an emergency management company to take over while they sorted out the mess. One of their first actions was to send a formal letter to all homeowners explaining the situation and apologizing for the chaos. My $1,500 in fines were not only rescinded, but the HOA actually cut me a check for $300 for undue stress and legal fees incurred due to board member malfeasance. It didn't cover Jennifer's full bill, but it was something. They also immediately reinstated the contract with Alpine Snow Services. The preliminary hearing for Patricia's criminal case was in March. I had to testify about the letters and the fines and the hearing. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Angela Torres, who seemed to take personal offense at Patricia's actions. HOA embezzlement is more common than people think, she told me outside the courtroom. But it's usually small amounts, petty theft. Miss Dalton got greedy. And the fact that she tried to bully homeowners into doing work that contracted services should have done, that shows consciousness of guilt. She knew what she was doing was wrong. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Patricia had been trying to save the HOA money and had made some bookkeeping errors. But the evidence was overwhelming. The fake invoices, the terminated real contracts, the payments to her husband's company, the attempts to force homeowners to do the work for free. It was all documented. The trial was in June. I'd never been to a criminal trial before and frankly hoped I'd never have to go to one again. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, and colder. Patricia sat at the defense table looking like she'd aged a decade. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Gary testified first, walking the jury through the financial documents. Then came homeowners Patricia had bullied over the years. I wasn't the first person she'd tried to strong-arm into doing work. A woman named Sarah Chen had been fined repeatedly for not repainting the exterior of her townhouse, even though the HOA contract said the HOA was responsible for exterior maintenance. A man named Robert Kim had been threatened with liens for not replanting flower beds in the common areas. When it was my turn to testify, the prosecutor asked me to describe the letters and the fines. She fined me $1,500 in one day, I said, for not clearing a parking lot that I had no responsibility to clear. When I showed her my contract proving I wasn't required to do it, she didn't care. She just kept issuing more fines. Did she ever explain why you specifically were being required to clear the parking lot? No. It seemed random. I was just the person she decided to target. Patricia's attorney cross-examined me, trying to suggest that maybe I'd misread my contract or that I was exaggerating the situation. But I had copies of every letter, every email, photos of everything. There wasn't anything to dispute. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing was 2 weeks later. The judge was an older man with gray hair and reading glasses that he kept adjusting as he reviewed documents. "Miss Dalton," he said, looking over those glasses at Patricia. "You held a position of trust in your community. Your neighbors elected you to lead their homeowners association, to manage their collective resources responsibly. Instead, you treated the HOA as your personal bank account. You stole over $50,000. And when homeowners questioned you, you bullied and threatened them. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a systematic pattern of theft and abuse lasting years." He sentenced her to 3 years in prison and ordered her to pay back every cent she'd stolen, plus interest, plus the legal fees the HOA had incurred investigating and prosecuting her. Her husband, who'd been charged as an accomplice, got 2 years probation after taking a plea deal and agreeing to cooperate fully. The Meadowbrook Heights HOA spent the next year rebuilding. An entirely new board was elected. Gary stayed on as treasurer because despite his initial oversight in missing Patricia's scheme, everyone agreed he'd done the right thing once he'd discovered it. The new president was a retired teacher named Margaret Foster, who seemed more interested in organizing community events than in wielding petty power. One of the board's first actions was to completely rewrite the bylaws to include more oversight and transparency. All contracts over $1,000 now required approval from 3 board members. Financial statements were published monthly on a community website. Board meetings were recorded and archived. Jennifer, my attorney, used the case to build her reputation. She started getting calls from homeowners all over Colorado dealing with HOA issues. She sent me a nice thank you card and a gift certificate to a local restaurant for being the most pleasant client she'd had in years. Marcus, my real estate agent, used the story in his marketing materials, carefully anonymized, as an example of why buyers needed to carefully review HOA documents and warning signs of HOA corruption. He said it actually helped his business because people appreciated his thoroughness. As for me, I just wanted to live in my townhouse in peace. The new HOA board was night and day compared to Patricia's regime. When a pipe burst in my bathroom that winter and caused water damage to the unit below me, Margaret called me personally to ask if I was okay and to explain how the insurance process would work. No threats, no fines, just neighborly concern. The parking lot got cleared every time it snowed. Alpine Snow Services was reliable and thorough. I'd see their trucks out there at 5 a.m. after overnight storms, clearing everything before most people woke up. It was what I'd been paying for all along with my HOA fees. I ran into Gary at the mailboxes one afternoon in early December, almost exactly a year after the snow removal letter that had started everything. "Can you believe it's been a year?" he said, shaking his head. "Seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "How are you doing?" I asked. He'd taken Patricia's betrayal hard, feeling like he should have caught it sooner. "Better," he said. "The new board is great. Margaret actually wants input from people instead of just dictating orders, and we've got safeguards in place now. Nothing like that could happen again." "That's good." "I owe you an apology," Gary said. "I should have questioned things sooner. I should have looked deeper into the finances before it got to the point where she was harassing you." "You didn't know," I said. "She was hiding it well." Still, you fought back when a lot of people would have just paid the fines to avoid the hassle. You saved this community a lot of money and a lot of future problems. I appreciated that, though I didn't feel particularly heroic. I'd just been annoyed at being told to shovel a parking lot that wasn't my responsibility. The following spring, the HOA held a community barbecue in the green space behind the clubhouse. It was Margaret's idea, a way to rebuild community bonds after the chaos of Patricia's trial and everything that had followed. I almost didn't go because I'm not great at those kinds of social events, but I figured I should make an effort. Sarah Chen, the woman who'd been bullied about the painting, brought her famous potato salad. Robert Kim manned the grill with unexpected expertise. Kids ran around playing tag while adults stood in clusters talking and laughing. It felt like an actual community instead of just people who happened to live near each other. Margaret clinked a glass to get everyone's attention. I just want to say thank you to everyone for sticking together this past year. We've been through a lot as a community, but we came out stronger. Special thanks to Gary for his diligence, and to Ethan for having the courage to stand up when something wasn't right. People clapped. I felt my face get hot. I wasn't used to being the center of attention. After the barbecue, as I was walking back to my townhouse, a younger couple I didn't recognize stopped me. They looked like they were in their late 20s, both wearing University of Colorado sweatshirts. "Are you Ethan Patterson?" the woman asked. "Yeah," I said, wondering if I was about to get served with some kind of legal paper. You get paranoid about that after spending time in courtrooms. "We just bought Unit 42, the man said. "Closed last week. Our agent told us about what happened with the previous HOA president. We almost didn't buy here because of it, but then we found out the whole story and how the community handled it. It actually made us more confident about buying here. Shows there are people here who care about doing things right." "Oh," I said, not sure what else to say. "Welcome to the neighborhood, I guess." "Thanks," the woman said. "I'm Victoria Vale and this is my husband Tom. We're just glad to be part of a community that actually functions like a community." They walked off toward their unit and I continued to mine. It was strange to think that the whole nightmare with Patricia had somehow become a selling point, proof that the community could police itself and fix problems. I suppose that was better than it being a permanent stain on the neighborhood's reputation. That summer was quiet in the best possible way. The landscaping company kept the common areas looking nice. The pool maintenance company kept the pool clean and properly chlorinated. Alpine Snow Services was contracted for the following winter. Everything worked the way it was supposed to, the way it always should have. I saw Patricia one more time, completely by accident. I was at the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon in August, debating between two different brands of coffee, when I heard a familiar voice in the next aisle. My stomach immediately tensed up. I peered around the end cap and saw her there, wearing an orange jumpsuit with a guard standing nearby. She was on some kind of work release program apparently, stocking shelves. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met for just a second. I didn't see anger or defiance in her expression. She just looked tired and old and defeated. I turned back to the coffee display and grabbed whichever one was closest. When I looked again, she'd moved to a different aisle. I thought about that encounter for days afterward. Part of me felt bad for her, which was stupid because she'd tried to steal from me and everyone else in the community. But seeing her in that jumpsuit, doing mindless work under supervision, it was hard not to feel some flicker of pity. Then I'd remember the $1,500 in fines she tried to levy against me in a single day, and the pity would evaporate. Jennifer called me in September with an update I hadn't asked for. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. Patricia's appeal was denied. She'll serve her full sentence minus time off for good behavior. Okay, I said. You sound weird. You okay? I saw her at the grocery store last month. She was on a work detail. How'd that feel? Complicated, Jennifer laughed. That's fair. Look, what she did was wrong and she deserved to face consequences. But she's still a human being who made terrible choices and is now paying for them. It's okay to feel complicated about that. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. The second winter after the snow removal letter incident was completely uneventful. Alpine Snow Services cleared the parking lot after every storm. I cleared my own driveway and walkway, as per Section 18 subsection D of my contract. The HOA functioned smoothly under Margaret's leadership. Gary continued keeping meticulous financial records and published monthly reports showing exactly where every dollar went. I'd been thinking about selling the townhouse and buying a house without an HOA. But after everything stabilized, I realized I actually liked living at Meadowbrook Heights. The location was convenient for work. My neighbors were nice. The common areas were well maintained. Margaret's board was reasonable and responsive to concerns. It was everything an HOA was supposed to be. Victoria and Tom Vale became friends of sorts. We'd grab beers occasionally at a brewery downtown, and they'd ask questions about the neighborhood and Boulder in general. Through them, I met other newer homeowners who'd moved in after Patricia's arrest. The community was slowly refreshing itself with people who appreciated good governance and community involvement. The spring community meeting in my third year living there had about 40 people in attendance, which Margaret said was triple the average turnout from Patricia's era. People actually wanted to be involved now. The meeting covered routine items like budget approval and landscaping plans. When Margaret called for new business, a woman I didn't recognize raised her hand. "I just want to say thank you," she said. "I've lived in 4 different HOA communities in my life, and this is the first one that actually feels like people are working together instead of against each other. My last HOA tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of beige on my shutters. This is so much better." People laughed and applauded. Margaret smiled. "We learned some hard lessons, but we're committed to doing better. HOAs should make communities better, not worse." After the meeting, Gary pulled me aside. "I'm stepping down as treasurer next year," he said. "Why? You're great at it." "I'm 72. I want to travel with my wife while we still can. We're thinking about buying an RV and seeing the country." "That sounds great," I said, and meant it. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider running for the board. We need younger people involved. People who care about doing things right." I'd never thought about being on an HOA board. The idea had always seemed like a nightmare of paperwork and neighbor complaints. But maybe that was because of Patricia's example. Margaret's board seemed to actually enjoy their work, or at least find it meaningful. "Let me think about it," I said. I did think about it. For weeks. I talked to Jennifer, who laughed and said I'd make a terrible board member because I'd actually read the bylaws and hold people accountable. I talked to Marcus, who said it would be good for property values to have engaged owners on the board. I talked to Victoria and Tom, who both encouraged me to do it. Finally, I talked to Margaret. We met for coffee at a place near the community. "Why do you do it?" I asked her. "The board work." "It's volunteer. You don't get paid. Why spend your time on it?" Margaret stirred sugar into her coffee and thought for a moment. "I was a teacher for 35 years. I like helping people and organizing things. When I retired, I needed something to keep me engaged. The HOA board lets me do that. Plus, after what Patricia did, I felt like someone needed to step up and prove that HOAs could work the way they're supposed to." "Do you think I'd be good at it?" "I think you'd be great at it. You're detail-oriented, You stand up for what's right even when it's difficult, and you actually care about the community. That's more than most board members bring to the table. So I ran for a board position. There were 3 open seats and 4 candidates, including me. I wrote a short statement for the ballot about transparency and community engagement. I didn't campaign or anything because that seemed weird. But apparently my reputation from the Patricia incident carried weight. When the votes were counted, I'd received the second most votes, behind only a retired engineer named Paul something who'd lived in the community for 15 years. My first board meeting was slightly terrifying. Margaret ran it efficiently, and everyone seemed to know what they were doing. My main contribution was asking questions when I didn't understand something, which happened frequently. But nobody seemed annoyed by it. Paul, the retired engineer, actually thanked me afterward for asking about the reserve fund because he'd been wondering the same thing but felt stupid asking. Being on the board gave me a completely different perspective on the community. I saw how much work went into keeping everything running smoothly. Hiring and managing contractors, reviewing budgets, responding to homeowner concerns, planning for long-term maintenance. It was a lot. But it was also rewarding in ways I hadn't expected. When we updated the community playground equipment and I saw kids playing on the new swings, that felt good. When we negotiated a better rate on the insurance policy and were able to avoid raising HOA fees, that felt like a real accomplishment. When a homeowner sent an email thanking the board for quickly addressing a drainage issue, that made the hours of meetings worthwhile. Patricia was released from prison during my second year on the board. I heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine before I saw the official notification. Apparently part of her parole terms was that she couldn't live at Meadowbrook Heights anymore. Her husband had already sold their unit and moved to somewhere in Wyoming. I wondered sometimes if she'd learned anything from the experience. If she lay awake at night regretting her choices, or if she still believed she'd been in the right somehow. I'd never know. She was out of my life and out of the community's life. That was enough. The community continued to grow and change. More young families moved in. The demographics shifted younger overall. Margaret eventually stepped down as president, and Paul took over. I was elected vice president, which came with more responsibilities, but also more ability to shape how things worked. We implemented new policies based on lessons from the Patricia era. Term limits for board members so no one could entrench themselves in power. Mandatory financial audits every year by an independent firm. A community ombudsman position for homeowners who had concerns about board decisions. Open office hours where any homeowner could meet with board members to discuss issues. None of it was revolutionary. It was just good governance, but it made a difference. Homeowner satisfaction surveys showed consistent improvement. The community's property values remained stable even during market fluctuations. People stayed instead of selling as soon as they could. 5 years after the snow removal letter, I was still living at Meadowbrook Heights, still on the HOA board, still clearing my own driveway and walkway after storms while Alpine Snow Services handled the parking lot. The whole thing had become a story I'd tell at parties sometimes, though I usually downplayed my role. It was just about reading a contract and standing up when something wasn't right. Anyone would have done the same, except that wasn't true. Plenty of people would have just paid the fines to avoid the hassle, or complained privately but not taken action, or assumed the HOA must be right because they were the authority. I'd gotten lucky in being stubborn enough and annoyed enough to fight back. And that stubbornness had uncovered a much bigger problem and ultimately made the community better. On the 5-year anniversary of the letter, December 15th, I was at the mailbox checking mail when Victoria walked up with her daughter, who was now 3 years old and apparently deeply interested in snow. "Snow, Mommy, snow," the little girl shouted, pointing at the white-covered ground. "Yes, baby, that's snow," Victoria said, then noticed me. "Hey, Ethan, you remember the date?" "I do. 5 years since Patricia tried to make me shovel the parking lot." "Best thing that ever happened to this community," Victoria said. "In a weird way, Tom and I were just talking about that. If you just paid the fines, we probably wouldn't have bought here. The community would still be getting embezzled. Nothing would have changed. Somebody else would have fought back eventually. Maybe or maybe not." She hoisted her daughter higher on her hip. "Anyway, we're grateful. We love it here." They walked off toward their unit, the little girl still announcing snow every few steps. I grabbed my mail and headed inside. There were the usual bills and advertisements, plus the monthly HOA newsletter that we'd started publishing under Margaret's leadership. It had updates on community projects, a calendar of events, financial highlights, and a photo section showing community life. This month's photo section included pictures from the holiday party we'd held the previous weekend. There was one of kids decorating cookies, one of Paul dressed as Santa, one of a group of neighbors singing carols, and one of me helping set up tables before the event started. I looked at that photo for a longer time than it warranted. 5 years ago, I'd been a guy who kept to himself, showed up to mandatory meetings when required, and otherwise tried to avoid HOA drama. Now, I was someone who helped plan community events and served on the board and knew my neighbors by name. It was strange how things worked out sometimes. My phone rang. It was Jennifer. "Hey," she said. "I'm working on a case with some similarities to yours. HOA trying to make a homeowner pay for common area repairs that should be covered by HOA fees. I'm using your case as precedent. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case you get a call from opposing counsel. They'd call me, probably not, but you never know. They might want to claim your situation was different somehow. Just thought you should know. Thanks for the warning. How's board life treating you?" "It's good. Busy but good." "Never thought you'd be an HOA board member when this started, did you?" I laughed. "No, definitely not. Life's weird." After we hung up, I thought about that. Life was weird. A threatening letter about snow removal had led to uncovering embezzlement, which had led to criminal prosecution, which had led to HOA reform, which had led to me joining the board and actually caring about community governance. None of it was what I'd planned or expected, but it was good. The community was good. The neighbors were good. The board was functional and transparent and actually serving the homeowners instead of bullying them. All because I'd been annoyed enough to read my contract and stubborn enough to fight back when I was right. The snow kept falling that winter. Alpine Snow Services kept clearing the parking lot. I kept clearing my driveway. The HOA kept functioning smoothly. And every time I walked past that parking lot and saw it properly cleared, I felt a small sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some fight or proven a point, but because things were working the way they should. The system was working. The community was thriving, and I'd played a small part in making that happen. That was enough. Years later, when I finally did sell the townhouse and buy a house, I made sure to carefully review any HOA documents. And when my new neighbors complained about their HOA in a different community, I had advice to offer. Read your contract. Document everything. Stand up when something isn't right. Don't assume the HOA is always correct just because they're the authority. But I also told them about Margaret and Gary and Paul and the new board at Meadowbrook Heights, about how HOAs could work when run by people who cared about the community instead of power, about how transparency and accountability made all the difference. about how bad situations could lead to positive change if people were willing to fight for it. The snow removal letter was years behind me, but its lessons stayed relevant. Stand up for yourself. Read the fine print. Question authority when authority is wrong. Work together with others who care. Make things better instead of just complaining about how they are. Simple lessons, really, but important ones. And all because an HOA president thought she could bully me into shoveling a parking lot that was never my responsibility to begin with. Patricia had meant to intimidate and control. Instead, she'd sparked a movement toward better governance and genuine community. I doubted that was what she'd intended, but I was grateful for it anyway. The parking lot at Meadowbrook Heights was still getting cleared properly. The HOA was still functioning well. The community was still thriving. And somewhere, Patricia was living with the consequences of her choices, while the community she tried to exploit had moved on and become stronger without her. That felt like justice. Not perfect, maybe, but real. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. The system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. The bad actor had faced consequences. The community had healed and improved, and life had gone on better than before. I thought about all of this while standing in my new driveway, shovel in hand, looking at the snow that actually was my responsibility to clear. No HOA to deal with at my new place. No board meetings or budget reviews or neighbor drama. Just me and my house and my own driveway. It was simpler, quieter, easier, but I found myself missing the community sometimes, missing the connections and the shared purpose and even the occasional complicated board decisions. There was something meaningful about being part of something larger than yourself, about working with neighbors toward common goals, about making a community function well. Maybe someday I'd move back to an HOA community. But if I did, I'd know what to look for. Green flags like active participation and transparent finances and responsive leadership. Red flags like unchecked power and lack of oversight and boards that saw homeowners as subjects instead of neighbors. And I'd always read every word of the contract. Always. Because that's where everything starts. Know what you're agreeing to. Know what your rights are. Know what the HOA can and cannot demand. That knowledge is power and it's protection, and it's the foundation of standing up for yourself when necessary. The snow kept falling. I kept shoveling. And somewhere in Boulder, Colorado, at a townhouse community called Meadowbrook Heights, Alpine Snow Services was clearing a parking lot that one HOA president had tried to make my responsibility. The system was working. Justice had been served. The community was thriving. And that made all the hassle, all the stress, all the conflict worth it. Because in the end, standing up for what was right had made things better for everyone. That was the real victory, more than any legal judgment or criminal conviction. The community was better. People were better off. And I'd played a part in that. The snow removal letter was years ago now, but its impact continued. Every homeowner at Meadowbrook Heights benefited from the reforms that followed. Every future resident would buy into a community with proper safeguards and good governance. And every time it snowed, that parking lot got cleared the way it should, the way homeowners were paying for. Simple justice. Simple fairness. Simple doing things right. That was all I'd ever wanted. And in the end, through persistence and stubbornness and refusing to back down when I was right, that's exactly what happened. The parking lot got cleared. The embezzler went to prison. The community healed and grew stronger. And I learned that sometimes fighting back against petty tyranny doesn't just help you. It helps everyone. That was worth remembering, worth sharing, worth standing up for again if I ever needed to. Because communities only work when people care enough to make them work, when people are willing to fight for fairness and transparency and basic decency. One threatening letter, one unreasonable demand, one homeowner stubborn enough to say no. That's all it took to change everything.